Good evening. Britain lost a princess today. A young woman described by all to whom she reached out as irreplaceable. An early morning car crash in a Paris underpass ended a life with more than its share of pain and courage, warmth and compassion. Just over 2 hours ago, an RAF plane brought her home for the last time to an RAF base in West London. Brian Hanrahan was there.
The princess's body was brought home with royal ceremonial. A BA-146 of the Royal Squadron landed at RAF Northolt into the setting sun. Waiting to receive it were the Prime Minister and the Defence Secretary. The procedure used was drawn up years ago in the event of a death of a member of the royal family abroad, but not used until today. Aboard the plane were Prince Charles and the Princess's two sisters, who'd flown to Paris to escort her body home. The coffin, draped in the standard of the royal family, was carried from the plane by members of the Queen's Squadron of the RAF Regiment. It was a silent ceremony, no drums, no bands, no speeches. Prince Charles and her two sisters, Lady Jane Fellows and Lady Sarah McCorquodale, stood on the blustery tarmac as the coffin was placed in the hearse, with a single family wreath on top. Flowers from other members of the family, including those from the Prince of Wales, were placed alongside it. Afterwards, the mourners parted, the two sisters continuing the coffin to a private mortuary in London. Prince Charles stayed to fly back to Balmoral to join their two sons. The ceremony inside RAF Northolt was private, attended only by official guests. But outside, thousands waited along the route into London. There'll be much pressure for public mourning for the princess who captured many hearts, and in her sudden, unexpected death continues to attract great public attention. Brian Hanrahan, BBC News, RAF Northolt.
By all accounts, the last hours of the princess's life were among the happiest of recent months. She dined with the new love in her life, Dodi Fayed, but within minutes a horrific crash ended the dream, leaving him and their driver dead and the princess fatally injured. As the battle to save her life was lost and the reality of her passing hit home, the wave of shock and grief touched many around the world. Our chief news correspondent, Kate Adey, reports from Paris.
The crash was at high speed and horrific. Just after midnight, the black Mercedes hit the curb, cannoned into a concrete pillar of an underpass, then bounced into the side wall. The French authorities say the driver had lost control and was going at twice, possibly 3 times the speed limit. The impact killed Dodi Fayed immediately and his driver. The princess and her British bodyguard had to be cut from the wreckage. The emergency services arrived quickly and were reportedly appalled at the scene. It took over an hour to free the princess, during which time she received emergency treatment. First reports had described her as having arm and thigh injuries and concussion. She was taken to La Pitié-Salpêtrière hospital, and at that time the gravity of her condition was not publicly known. She had massive chest injuries and suffered a heart attack shortly after arrival.
Malgré la fermeture de cette plaie et un massage cardiaque.
For 2 hours, the doctors had tried desperately to save her, but despite their efforts, she died at 4 in the morning. By then, the royal family and both British and French governments had been informed of the situation. The French Prime Minister led his country's tributes.
Je sais que les Français ont toujours été séduits par son charme.
The French people were captivated by her charm, humanity and personality. We of course express our condolences to our friends of the United Kingdom.
As the news spread, the British ambassador added his words.
The death of the Princess of Wales fills us all with deep shock and with deep grief. And our thoughts and our prayers are with her family and her friends, and with the family and friends of the others who died in the accident.
The Princess of Wales and Dodi Al Fayed had begun their evening with dinner at the Ritz Hotel. Photographers, the persistent paparazzi, were outside. So the Mercedes driver, with the bodyguard in the front, collected the couple at a rear entrance, then headed towards a villa owned by the Fayed family across the river. 7 photographers set off in pursuit on motorcycles. There are several witnesses to the chase, and the 7 photographers are now in police custody, some apparently having taken pictures of the crash. The main witness will be Trevor Rhys-Jones, the bodyguard, who has injuries to his head and lungs. The site of the accident is a mundane traffic tunnel in the centre of the city. For those who have come to look, there is very little to convey what happened here. Perhaps this has added to the sense of disbelief and shock that is very evident. All day there has been a constant stream to the spot. Tourists, Parisians, travellers, French citizens, Japanese students, American soldiers, British holidaymakers. Most could not find words enough to express their feelings. The messages with the flowers were in many languages. From the roadside spot, ripples of grief spread wide. And amid the emotion, the journey home had to be prepared. The French President, Monsieur Chirac, greeting Prince Charles, who'd arrived at the hospital in the late afternoon. A short time later, with a French honour guard in attendance, the coffin of Diana, Princess of Wales, was borne from the hospital, followed by the Prince of Wales and the sisters of the Princess, Jane and Sarah. At a quiet military airport west of Paris, the RAF took over. A slow progress to an aircraft of the Queen's flight. And a few flowers for the journey. There is shock in France and rage at the circumstances of the accident, and there is sadness. Kate Adie, BBC News, Paris.
Throughout the day, thousands of people gathered to pay their respects outside Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace, the Princess's London home. And there have been special church services to remember Diana and those who died with her. David Loyne reports on the death that left so many stunned.
Tonight, Kensington Palace, the London home of the Princess of Wales, was the focus of the nation's grief. Wave upon wave of flowers piled as high as they could go. This morning, even by the time they came to change the guard at Buckingham Palace, a more sombre affair than usual, the pavement outside was already a sea of flowers. Diana knew she would never live here as queen, but there was real emotion, perhaps fulfilling her hope that she would be queen in people's hearts.
Everybody loves Diana. I think she's someone that every young woman probably wanted to be. She was a wonderful person, beautiful. She was just a lovely person. We all hoped that we could be like her.
I just heard that she died, and I was so upset, and I cried a lot.
In St Paul's Cathedral, as in churches up and down the land, there were special prayers of remembrance, with added poignancy here, where the marriage began 16 years ago.
Many of us recall the Archbishop of Canterbury saying at that service, "This is the stuff of which fairy tales are made." But as the story unfolded, as the tale was told, there was a dimension of tragedy.
Leaders are still trying to make sense of the way Diana's life was cut short so dramatically.
She had a faith in God, although she wasn't the kind of person who wore religion on her sleeves. There was a deep faith there going on. And her relationship with Mother Teresa, for example, was one of the she spoke to me about. So we cope, I think, by holding on to the things that she believed in.
I think in many ways she had quite a lot of sadness in her life, but she will be remembered by the very considerable amount of good which she did. And I'm thinking not only recently on the question of landmines, but on the question also of the homeless, especially the young homeless.
Diana's relationship with Dodi Fayed, the heir to the owner of Harrods, was her most serious since her marriage broke down. A spokesman for the family said it would have lasted.
I happened to speak to Dodi before he went back to Los Angeles to deal with a piece of legal business which now is pathetically irrelevant. And I said to him, if you go to the studio and you go to the canteen or commissary and you have a cup of coffee with a girl, the papers will say you've got a new girlfriend. And he turned to me and he said, I will never, ever have another girlfriend. And he said it in such a way. He never raised his voice, but he said it in such a determined way that I knew he was absolutely sincere.
In the Muslim tradition, Dodi Fayed's funeral service was held on the day of his death at Regent's Park Mosque in London. His body was then taken to a Muslim cemetery near Woking for burial in the country which had never allowed his father to become a citizen. While on the other side of London, thousands of people continue to mill around Buckingham Palace, mourning the People's Princess in their own way, whatever final form national mourning might take. David Loyne, BBC News.
Before meeting the plane bringing Diana's body back to RAF Northolt tonight, the Prime Minister led the tributes from politicians. He described Diana as a wonderful and warm human being who touched the lives of so many in Britain and throughout the world with joy and comfort. Mr. Blair said he was utterly devastated by her death. Our political editor Robin Oakley reports on the reaction in the world of politics.
The grieving royal family went to church as usual this morning near Balmoral, Prince Charles having told his sons of their mother's death earlier. Politicians united in their sympathy and in shock at the loss of a princess whose charm and campaigning compassion many of them had encountered at first hand. In his Sedgefield constituency, the Prime Minister, whose young family had met the Princess and her children recently, paid an emotional tribute to her qualities.
Our thoughts and prayers are with Princess Diana's family, in particular her two sons, the two boys. Our hearts go out to them. We are today a nation in Britain in a state of shock, in mourning, in grief that is so deeply painful for us. She was a wonderful and a warm human being. Though her own life was often sadly touched by tragedy, she touched the lives of so many others in Britain throughout the world with joy and with comfort.
Normal political hostilities ground to a halt, and as Prince Charles left from Aberdeen to fly to Paris and collect his former wife's body, the government confirmed that campaigning on the Scottish Parliament referendum would be suspended. Other party leaders paid their own tributes.
I want to express on behalf of my party and on behalf of my constituents here in Yorkshire our sadness and terrible shock in the news overnight. It has come as a great shock to everybody waking up this morning and a great sadness to all of us, and of course we're all thinking about Prince William and Prince Harry and the other members of the family of the princess. She was a unique and very lively and attractive individual, and so people will feel a personal sense of loss. But of course we should also pay tribute today to the tremendous work that she did.
Our thoughts and our prayers and our first considerations must be for her family, the Prince of Wales, her wider family. Beyond that, she brought light and compassion to our life and much else as well, and that light has now gone out.
As flags flew at half-mast in Whitehall, the only note of controversy struck was over what, if anything, could be done to restrict the sort of media intrusion being blamed for the princess's death. Politicians of all parties have been united today in simple personal grief for the loss of the woman whom the Prime Minister called the People's Princess, and in sympathy for two young princes left without a mother. But they're expecting an anti-media backlash with the demand for new privacy laws to curb intrusion. It could yet test ministers' view that media self-regulation is the least worst option. Robin Oakley, BBC News, Downing Street.
Indeed, none other than the princess's brother, Earl Spencer, has blamed the behaviour of the media for his sister's death. He accused newspaper editors who bought what he called intrusive pictures of the princess of having blood on their hands. The tragedies led to calls for tougher action against the press. Here's our media correspondent, Nick Hyam.
These were the motorbikes seized by Paris police, apparently used by freelance photographers or paparazzi following Princess Diana's car. The suggestion that the paparazzi may have caused the princess's death incensed many. There were angry scenes outside Buckingham Palace aimed at journalists and newspapers.
They killed Diana.
Commercial journalists and commercial journalists.
They killed Diana.
The most outspoken condemnation came from the princess's brother in South Africa.
This is not a time for recriminations, but for sadness. However, I would say that I always believed the press would kill her in the end. But not even I could imagine that they would take such a direct hand in her death, as seems to be the case. It would appear that every proprietor and editor of every publication that has paid for intrusive and exploitative photographs of her, encouraging greedy and ruthless individuals to risk everything in pursuit of Diana's image, has blood on his hands today.
From the moment her relationship with the heir to the throne became public, the young Diana Spencer found herself pursued by photographers in the street. It was something she always hated.
I never know where a lens is going to be. A normal day would be followed by 4 cars. A normal day would come back to my car and find 6 freelance photographers jumping around me. Some people would say, well, if you had a policeman, it'd make it easier. It doesn't at all. They've decided that I'm still a project after 15, 16 years that sells well.
Last night, newspapers, including this one, were offered pictures of the princess lying in the car for £200,000. They didn't buy. Now there are calls for newspapers not to deal with the paparazzi in future.
All newspapers need to say that they will not publish these paparazzi photographs because these chaps are doing this not for their family albums, but for money, huge sums of money. And it may be if that fails, the government will have to consider ways of preventing those kind of intrusive photographers, that kind of harassment. And that is quite different, let's be clear about this, from a privacy law.
The paparazzi chase celebrities of all kinds. Here, photographers on motorcycles pursue France's President Chirac, even though France has strict privacy laws. One photographer says the paparazzi can't be stopped.
What are you going to do? You can't introduce a privacy law in this country. This didn't happen in this country, it happened in France. France has got the tightest privacy laws in the world. You're just not going to stop this sort of thing happening. The paparazzi know. London isn't the market, Paris isn't the market, the world is the market.
The press believes it's being unfairly blamed for the activities of freelancers. Newspapers say there's no need for tighter controls.
She had a really unique relationship with the public, and the media were the way many times she communicated with the public. She had a place in the hearts of the public, and I don't think we'll see that same press attention for another person really again.
Tabloid newspaper editors have been keeping their heads down today amid the calls for greater self-restraint and renewed talk of privacy laws. But privately, one told me the press was being judged before full details of the accident were known, and he agreed with other editors who say privacy laws, which limit what can be published, are no solution to the problem of harassment by photographers on the ground. The princess has become an icon of beauty and glamour. Now the newspapers who fed her popularity may find popular opinion has turned against them, forcing them to act. Nick Hyam, BBC News.
Throughout the day, leaders and statesmen from around the world have paid tribute to the princess. The Russian President Boris Yeltsin said Princess Diana was well known and loved by the Russians. Many knew about her major contribution to charitable actions in and beyond Britain. The South African President, Nelson Mandela, also paid tribute. He said the princess had been a great ambassador for Britain.
I had the honor of hosting her a few months ago when she visited our country. And I was tremendously impressed by her. She was undoubtedly one of the best ambassadors of Great Britain.
And Mother Teresa of Calcutta spoke of Diana's deep desire to help the sick and the poor.
She had great love for the poor. She was very often anxious to help me to come to know a little more about the poor. She was very, only because she had such a position, so she could not actually come and work with us.
President Clinton has said he'll be writing to the royal family, the Prime Minister and to the Princess's brother to express his condolences. He interrupted his holiday to speak of his profound sadness at her death and to say how much he liked and admired her. Our Washington correspondent Bridget Kendall reports on the impact Diana made across the United States.
Outside the British Embassy in Washington, a steady stream of Princess Diana's many followers in America come to pay tribute. It was the middle of the night when her death was first confirmed, and the first to come left lighted candles. Others marked their affection and grief with cards and even a poem. President Clinton was with his wife on an island off Massachusetts when he heard the news last night at a private party. This morning, breaking away from his holiday, on behalf of fellow Americans, he expressed his condolences to the people of the United Kingdom.
We liked her very much. We admired her work for children, for people with AIDS, for the cause of ending the scourge of landmines in the world, and for her love for her children, William and Harry. And I know that this is a very difficult time for millions of people in the United Kingdom who are deeply shocked and grieving. The American people send their condolences to all of them.
Perhaps nowhere more than in the United States did the Princess of Wales capture the public's imagination. From her first visit as the young bride of the Prince of Wales, she quickly won celebrity status, the star of the show at President Reagan's White House when she danced with John Travolta. But it wasn't just her photogenic looks and stylish clothes that won her an adoring American public. Her work with children and the disadvantaged meant she was particularly welcome at the Clinton White House, guest of honour at a breakfast hosted by the First Lady last September, who called her one of the nicest British invasions.
She would send shivers down the spine of professional diplomats because, in a sense, she was not controllable. She was not good at delivering formal messages. But conveying an image of a Britain that cared and of a Britain that was relevant to a huge range of human concerns, I thought she was spectacular.
Today, news of her death has dominated news reports across the country, and nowhere more than in the centre of New York, a city where she was always greeted with enthusiasm.
She particularly liked New York City. She enjoyed coming here, and I think New Yorkers particularly loved her because of this caring and compassion that she had for people. The circumstances of her death, no matter what they would have been tragic. From everything that we can tell, it's even more tragic that she died in this way.
Here in the nation's capital, the mood has also been one of shock and bewilderment. She wasn't afraid to reach out to people, was how one woman put it. We're all going to miss her. For a country that delights in informality, she was the perfect 20th century princess. Bridget Kendall, BBC News, Washington.
Well, with me now is our court correspondent Jenny Bond. Jenny, the big unknown tonight is what kind of a funeral the royal family believe she merits.
And we won't know the answer to that until tomorrow. That is now clear. They had hoped to put out a statement tonight. The Lord Chamberlain, the head of the Queen's household, has been having discussions for much of the day with both families, the Spencer family and the royal family. They have to find a balance between what the families want and obviously the public mood. And there does seem to be a head of steam now for a public funeral of some kind to be held for her. And I am told by Buckingham Palace that we should draw no conclusions from the fact that her body has been taken to a private mortuary and not to a royal chapel tonight.
The particular tragedy of this accident, in many ways, is its timing, when so much was beginning to go right for her.
It was in both her public and her private life. Of course, she seemed to have found true romance just a year on from her divorce. She was very happy. From those who were close to her said they'd never seen her so happy. Her public life, she had found a role that she believed in, a cause that she believed in passionately, the campaign against landmines. So it is particularly ironic that she should have been cut down at this stage. But then she told me in a conversation some months ago that she always felt that the happiness of being with a companion, a new friend, a new husband, would elude her, because she felt that no man would take the pressures of the press. She said, why should they put up with it?
Well, we heard the cold rage of Earl Spencer against the paparazzi and the editors and proprietors who encouraged them. Were they the bane of her life?
She felt they were. She felt the paparazzi were, not the official press and the official media, whom she invited on the tours and whom she needed and she used to promote the good causes for which she worked. But she told me that she knew it was a very strong word to use, but she felt raped by the prying eyes of the paparazzi. And she had hoped that by giving up the title, Her Royal Highness, it would earn her some privacy, because she felt that that was a clear demonstration that she wasn't royal anymore and didn't merit this intrusion, as she saw it, into her private life.
Had she, at the time of her death, come to terms with the other relationship in her life, Charles and Camilla?
Well, she told me some very interesting things about this. She said that she recognised that Camilla was and always had been the love of Prince Charles's life. She said that she still had caring feelings for Prince Charles. She used the word love. She said, I still love him. I'm not in love with him, and I bear neither of them any animosity. And she also said that she felt that Camilla had been such a long-standing, loyal and discreet companion to the Prince of Wales that she felt that Camilla deserved some recognition. She didn't expand on that, although she did say that she didn't mean marriage by that. I don't think she was quite sure what she meant, but I thought it was an extraordinary statement from a woman now who has met such an untimely and tragic end.
Jenny Bond, thank you. And at 9:30 tomorrow morning, you can put your questions to Jenny Bond and to our media correspondent Nick Hyam in an extended breakfast news. The lines will be open for calls on Diana, Princess of Wales, and the number to call is 0181 811 1000. The lines indeed are already open now. But that's all from the newsroom for the moment. Back to David Dimbleby.